cameras on. We're throw the big switch. Get the cameras on. We are live on the Times Radio YouTube channel, getting ready for PMQs Unpacked. Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak. Tim Shipman will be here to pause the action live from the House of Commons. And then, of course, Lara Spirit will be here for the best of the rest as well. Get online right now. Tell us where you are. Gareth is in sunny, glorious Gower. Very good. Paul is here in Arley Kings, waiting for Zippy. Oh, we don't Zippy here this week, I'm afraid. Hello from Dulwich, says John. Alison is a bit further up the Trent and Mersey Canal. Whatever that means. And Jonathan says, do you need listener input for Lara's appraisal? That's a good thought, actually. Lara's appraisal's coming up, and as a line manager, I should be doing that. So if you want to feed in any comment on Lara's efforts, they do get in touch. Let us know where you're watching on the YouTube channel, and we'll go live to the House of Commons in just a few minutes' time. Before that, will Suella Braverman's case come up? It was revealed this morning, just after 10 o'clock, that no further action will be taken. Rishi Sunak has decided that Suella Braverman did not breach the ministerial code, and there's it's all done and dusted. She perhaps should have behaved quite the way she did, but that's the end of that. Well, my next guest thinks we should get rid of the ministerial code altogether, and then we wouldn't have these issues. Henry Hill is Deputy Editor of Conservative Home and joins me now. Hi, Henry.
Hello.
So, what do you think is the point of the ministerial code?
The problem with the ministerial code is that basically, as written, it's a comprehensive list of everything that ministers shouldn't do, and that includes the big stuff and also the really small stuff. And unfortunately, the way it's starting to be covered means that instead of focusing on the individual specific misdemeanors that ministers commit or are alleged to commit, we end up talking about whether or not they've breached the ministerial code. When I was debating Suella Braverman's previous departure from government the other day, the presenter of that show said she resigned from government for breaking the ministerial code. And so it's effectively risking turning this very broad set of rules, which are so broad because they include like leaking, that they could never be universally applied, into a sacking offence which is only ever applied selectively and undermines our understanding of the actual issues at play in each case.
So what's the alternative? Because I suppose that it's sort of evolved as it is, and each Prime Minister slightly rewrites it and adds something, normally based on the last scandal rather than the next one. So what's the alternative, do you think?
Well, so basically, the way that the cabinet works and has to work in a democratic system is that it's up to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister answers for his or her decisions to the House of Commons and the country. So that's the core. If you wanted to have a document in place of the ministerial code that fits the way that we seem to talk about it, you could have a much narrower one, which explicitly says, look, this doesn't cover every single thing that we don't expect ministers to do. You know, leaking's not on there, but this is a list of the really big stuff which we believe should carry serious sanction. And that way, when we said X or Y left government for breaking the ministerial code, that would make sense.
Do you think that the problem is less to do with the code and more to do with a degradation of sort of standards in politics?
I mean, no, this specifically is a problem about the code and about the way that we cover it. Like, you know, there are always going to be scandals and there are always going to be misconduct, and it's right that we call that out and it's right that we hold it to account. But no, it's actually ridiculous the way that you can take a story like this, which, you know, based on all the evidence we have, is she asked civil servants a question, was told it wasn't a business for civil servants, and left it there, and link it, by dint of it being an alleged breach of the ministerial code, to serious misconduct. That's actually bad for popular understanding of politics and for the perceived quality of politics. Do you think need to break that link?
Do you think as well that actually it's a bit of a cop out for prime ministers, that actually they should just, you know, if you're the prime minister, you should be able to judge what your ministers shouldn't be doing, and then stand by and defend those decisions. You know, you hire and fire your own ministers rather than sort of subcontracting it to a document or an ethics advisor or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. That is true. And it also risks, because that's always easier, right? It's always easier to sort of go, oh, I'm going to have a process and then call in Sir Laurie Magnus and then, you know, blame him or hide behind him for the decision. But that also risks real power ending up in the hands of officials, because as a prime minister, you can only hide behind the "I was only doing what the ethics advisor told me to do" thing if you always do what the ethics advisor tells you to do. And you basically, because at the moment you start using your own judgment and picking and choosing, you're rightly held accountable for your choices. So I think that it's really bad having this system which tempts prime ministers, instead of owning, this Suella Braverman thing could have taken 5 minutes. He should have just read the thing and been like, right, am I getting rid of her because I don't like her immigration policy, or am I keeping her because this is utterly trivial? Instead, we had this theatre of due process that just wasted everybody's time.
Go on then, Henry, while I've got you, what do you think will come up at PMQs today then? What will Keir Starmer go on?
Oh, well, I mean, he might have some fun with Boris Johnson. And then there's Suella. I mean, basically, what Starmer wants to do is what Sunak really doesn't want to do, which is link the Sunak government to the Boris Johnson government. Rishi's worked really hard to try and draw a clear line between those two. So if Starmer can try and get that Tory sleaze line to stick on Sunak using this latest stuff about Johnson and the Home Secretary, I think that's what we'll try and do.
Henry, really good to speak to you. And it's a really interesting piece that Henry had written for Conservative Home. That's Henry Hill there, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, on why he thinks we should get rid of the Ministerial Code. Right, stand by. PMQs Unpacked is next. We are live on Times Radio, live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Posting your comments. Where are you watching? What do you think is going to come up at PMQs? What's the question that you would ask if you could advise Keir Starmer? Tim Shipman, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times, joins me next. It's PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next, but first a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The Home Secretary's job is safe. As Rishi Sunak has said, she's not breached the ministerial code in her reaction to a speeding ticket. Suella Braverman asked for advice on whether she could do a speed awareness course privately. She says in a letter she made no further requests once she was told it wouldn't be appropriate for civil servants to help her. Sources have told The Times that this is the final straw in Boris Johnson's support for the government if Rishi Sunak doesn't stop what they're calling a witch hunt against him. Yesterday, Cabinet Office lawyers passed on information about more potential lockdown breaches to police. Mr Johnson says it's a politically motivated stitch-up. Inflation has decreased to 8.7%, but food inflation remains at more than 19%. The cost of clothing, furniture and restaurants all slowed down in the year up to April, helping to bring down the overall figure. And Netflix has started its crackdown on password sharing. Customers are being sent emails saying their accounts are for one household, and if they want to share it, they will need to pay £4.99. There'll be more news and sport in half an hour. But now on Times Radio and live on the Times Radio YouTube channel, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And Tim Shipman is here. Tim, how are you?
Very well. Got another linen jacket on for you.
It's a linen. It's a darker linen.
It's a dark. Yes, you've
it's
pulled out the pastels yourself.
Very nice. Yes, well, I thought when sun's out, lighter jacket. If that's not the sort of content you want to be watching on YouTube for, I don't know what is.
Well, you're going to ask me what he's going to do next, and I'm just going to agree with what Henry said earlier. So it's
Well, you can say it again.
Well, I think Tory sleaze, Braverman, Johnson. There's got to be some fun to be had there for Keir Starmer. And as Henry said earlier, just make it awkward for the PM. He doesn't want to talk about any of this stuff. Rishi Sunak, his whole MO is, I'm going to be the sort of boring chap, grinding away, doing serious things, developing policy, going on the world stage, improving our reputation. And to a degree, he's done all of those things, but he cannot escape the chaos of his own party. To a degree, he's only there because of the chaos of his own party. Him or whoever replaces him is going to have to deal with it. And it just keeps coming, doesn't it?
It really does keep coming. Loads of you on the YouTube channel today. David is in Centaur in Slovenia. Oh, hello, David. Patrick is in Gatley. John says hello from the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Is that real, John? Or is that a joke? Somebody called Harlequin Dreamer is in Liverpool. Andy's in Taunton. Hello, Andy. Edwin is in Austria, a Brit in Austria. Steve is in Dartmoor Brewery.
Sounds like the place to be.
That's where we want to get. Can we do the show from your place, Steve? We can get down there. Can't we go down Dartmoor? Jonathan's in Guildford, slightly less glamorously. What do you think Rishi Sunak can do to try and draw a line under all this? Because every time he tries to move on, something else comes along. I mean, mostly Boris Johnson comes along again.
Well, I suspect there's not a lot he can do in PMQs. He just needs to sort of go back to his talking points. And I dare say, I suspect you might have cause to ping your bell today.
Do we might have some of our regular...
I think, what's Rishi Sunak going to do? He's going to try and parry whatever Starmer does and then just go on the attack in desperate hope that he can get the people behind him cheering him along. Because there's not a lot he can do about the substance of this. I mean, at least Suella Braverman, from the technical point of view, has been sort of, in inverted commas, cleared. That doesn't hang over Sunak, and he can say that, he's discussed this with the independent advisor, and they've come to that conclusion. So whatever Starmer says about that, he can go swing. It was either that or say that I've launched an investigation.
And then it would roll on again.
And then it would have rolled on for endlessly. With Boris Johnson, this is an interesting situation, this Boris Johnson situation. How did this information come to light? Boris Johnson's people are absolutely convinced that, there's some conspiracy, not just in the civil service, but apparently involving ministers as well to sort of stitch him up. I mean, everybody, the rest of us have been speaking to in government, says ministers didn't have a clue about any of this stuff, and that the civil servants concerned were duty-bound to pass it on, ironically, because the taxpayer was paying for Boris Johnson's legal fees. There's a serious point here about, is the civil service trying to sort of gently ease out people it doesn't like and make life difficult for them? And I think even those of us that sometimes get information from some of these people would acknowledge that they're not all the biggest fans of some of these Tory ministers. But, if you're convinced that the world's out to get you and that there's someone with a gun coming at you, the best thing to do generally is not to leave piles of ammunition lying around.
Well, yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Right, here we go then. And there's obviously also the big issue of immigration and whether it's a bit awkward for whether or not Keir Starmer wants to go on that, because you wanted free movement, and if it were up to you, we'd still be in lockdown.
Well, Rishi Sunak can string that out probably. See if he can do 20 minutes on that.
Well, let's find out then. This is PMQs Unpacked, live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Let's go live to the comments now. This is question 1 from Keir Starmer.
How many work visas were issued to foreign nationals last year?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the new statistics, as the honourable gentleman knows, will be out later this week. The most recent statistics we had, as the ONS said at the time, contained a set of unique circumstances, including welcoming many people here for humanitarian reasons.
Well, there we are. We're both wrong.
Well, I mean, there are 6 questions.
There are 6 questions. Yeah.
If we get through 6 questions with that reference to Boris Johnson, I will buy a very expensive dinner.
For me?
Well, I mean,
fingers crossed.
I mean, you're not getting an expensive dinner. Right?
As soon as you said it, you panicked.
No, I'm happy to buy you one. It's just not going to happen.
This is a classic. Ask a very short question to which Rishi Sunak does not know the answer.
Well, I mean, he does know the answer. He just doesn't want to give the answer. And he knows that there's more figures coming tomorrow, which will be 50% higher than whatever Keir Starmer's about to throw at him. But, a lot of certainly last year's figures included 200,000 Ukrainians and 150,000 people from Hong Kong and 30,000 people from Afghanistan. The Hong Kong and the Afghan numbers have worked their way through the system. I think my understanding is that the Ukrainian number will still be high, and Sunak will still be able to say we're being very generous to Ukrainians. But last year's figure was 500,000, of which maybe half came from, probably quite 2/3 of it perhaps came from humanitarian access. But this year, it's going up to sort of 700,000-800,000.
And that's an additional net number.
Yes, additional net number, and the Ukrainians are probably 150,000 of that. So they've gone from 2/3 of us being generous to the rest of the world to it being well under a quarter of it. Well, good luck to him. He can make that argument today. He won't be able to make it tomorrow.
But also, Rishi Sunak trying to make the argument, this is humanitarian. You can't simultaneously say you're going to bring down the numbers and then say it's a good thing the numbers are up.
No, equally, you can't complain that the numbers are up and then say that you wouldn't control immigration and that they might go even further, which is what the Labour Party's position has been. So this is going to be one of those great moments of political doublespeak on both sides.
Well, let's find out. Well, I'm sure the first thing's going to happen is Keir Starmer's going to give us the answer to his first question. How many work visas were issued last year? Let's go back to the House of Commons question 2.
Are out. It's 250,000 work visas were issued last year. He knows that answer. He just doesn't want to give it. And the new numbers tomorrow are expected to be even higher. The Prime Minister stood on 3 Tory manifestos. Each one promised to reduce immigration. Each promise broken. They all stood on those manifestos as well. Why does he think his Home Secretary...
Order. I'm going to hear this question. Those who don't want to hear it, we know the answer. Keir Starmer.
They all stood on those manifestos. So why does he think his Home Secretary seems to have such a problem coping with points-based systems?
Mr. Speaker.
A little joke there.
And the same respect will be shown, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just this week we announced the biggest ever single measure to tackle legal migration, removing the right for international students to bring dependents, toughening the rules on post-study work and reviewing maintenance requirements. But what is the honourable gentleman's contribution? There are absolutely no ideas. There is absolutely no ideas, absolutely no semblance that there would be any control. Why? Because he believes in an open-door migration policy.
Does he?
Well, that may not be accurate, but Annalise Dodds was asked whether Labour would reduce immigration a few days ago and was unable to say that they would. And in some areas, she suggested that it might go up. So, as you pointed out at the start, this is a slightly awkward subject for the Labour Party, but it's interesting that he's tackling it.
Exactly. We've talked about this before, that when Keir Starmer, he does really wear his confidence on his sleeve. When things are going well, he'll more than happily walk into a story which you might think is troubling him or a policy area which isn't the best for them. When he's back against the wall, that also really shows, and he's a bit uncertain. But he's clearly thinking he's in a strong position. He's going to take on the thing that the Tories would think he wouldn't.
Yeah, no, exactly. And A, that partly wrong-foot Sunak sort of tactically during PMQs, and B, it allows Labour to kind of frame what happens tomorrow a little bit in their terms, and also to show that they're not frightened of talking about it. And Labour can always fall back on a sort of competence argument against a government that's failed to deliver what it said it was going to deliver. Sunak is always going to have the response that, Labour wants to control it a good deal less than the Tory party does. How that plays out, in the seats where it's a big issue, remains to be seen. But I think Starmer's calculation is that clearly that there's something to be gained from roughing up the Prime Minister. And it's probably not that likely that a lot of people in Darlington are sitting listening to this.
Yeah. And then the MPs sitting behind Rishi Sunak might be, reminding them that they haven't done enough on immigration, which is causing a lot of issues. We should point out, actually, Suella Braverman there, not a fan of a points-based system. Not a terrible joke, that. She is sitting next to Rishi Sunak, just to his left. And he's got David T.C. Davis, who I don't need to tell you is the Welsh Secretary, sitting to his right. So after the decision this morning that she could stay in the Cabinet and stay as Home Secretary, she's been brought into the Commons specially to...
She's nodding very gravely.
Very gravely.
On the television I'm looking at there. Very serious.
Very serious face.
Mean,
and we've already had 2 hits of Lindsay Hoyle, so I feel like that could be brewing.
They didn't really feel like we needed to either, did it? It's sort of... it's not quite Burko-style interventions, but Hoyle does like to make his presence felt.
He's also annoyed about more pre-briefing to the papers. He's granted an urgent question later on.
Every single speaker is always about that, and every single government ignores it.
Yes.
Can we just,
Fine, we'll ignore him as well.
Politicians fly business class. Surprise! There are too many special advisors in Downing Street. Surprise! Governments announce things not in the House of Commons. Oh, can we all grow up?
Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. This is question 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if anyone wants to see what uncontrolled immigration looks like, all they've got to do is wake up tomorrow morning, listen to the headlines, and see what this government...
Order. Mr. Bristow, I think you're going to be leaving. I'm asking you to leave now, because otherwise I'll name you. I'm not having it, and I've warned you before. It's the same people.
So that's Paul Bristow.
And the same will happen on this side.
The Conservative MP for Peterborough.
Mr. Speaker, the reason they're issuing so many visas is labour and skills shortages. And the reasons there are shortages is the low-wage Tory economy. Under his government's rules, businesses in IT, engineering, healthcare, architecture, welding can pay foreign workers 20% less than British workers for years and years on end. Does he think his policy is encouraging businesses to train people here or hire from abroad?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about immigration, but we know his position because it turns out that Labour would actually like to see even more people coming to the UK, increasing the numbers. That's not just my view, Mr. Speaker. Those were the words of his own frontbencher who said having a target isn't sensible, and that the numbers might have to go up, Mr. Speaker. So it's clear, whilst we're getting on with clamping down on legal migration, listening to the British public, he's perfectly comfortable wanting to say that he wants free movement back.
Hey. He wants free movement back. Lindsay Hall's not happy, kicking out Tory MP Paul. It's weird. It seems like
didn't
quite
seem
quiet,
that loud.
subdued.
It didn't seem very loud to me.
And maybe that was the problem. Maybe it was only Paul Bristow that was shouting, and he was a bit too close to the speaker.
To give
which
yourself
got
a bit
trouble.
more cover than that, perhaps. But
good mention of the word welding as well from Keir Starmer, as we know his father was a toolmaker,
reminding us of his forebears. And then this question I think explains a little bit why Labour's kind of going on this. You can see now that they're trying to tie high immigration to low wages for Brits, and that then becomes something that does play in the red wall reasonably well, and in parts of the country where a lot of migrants are coming in to do jobs. And after Brexit, of course, we scrapped the rule that was in place that companies were supposed to attempt to give a job to a Brit first, and that has meant that a lot of companies have been, encouraging people to come in. They're just coming in from different parts of the world rather than from the EU in great numbers these days.
In fact, the numbers, all the growth in the numbers is coming from outside the EU, which we could have controlled before we left the EU, but we're just choosing not to.
That's correct. And the problem they've dealt with this week with the dependents, if I remember correctly, something like 150,000 dependents came in last year, of which I believe about 45% were from Nigeria and about another 30% from India. So that wasn't an EU issue at all.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the House of Commons. We're halfway through now, and still no mention of Boris Johnson, Tim. I'm just saying we're halfway to a big dinner.
That's all right. I'm pretty relaxed.
You're still pretty relaxed.
I mean, as long as you accept a passing reference like the points reference, was clearly a reference to Braverman.
I think we'll have some sort of adjudication on that. We'll go back to the House of Commons. Fingers crossed there's no mention of Boris Johnson. Question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, they've lost control of the economy, they've lost control of public services, and now they've lost control of immigration. And if he was serious about weaning his government off the immigration lever, he would get serious about wages in Britain and get serious about skills and training. The apprenticeship levy isn't working. It's hard to find a single business that thinks that it is. And the proof is that almost half the levy isn't even being spent. That's fewer young people getting the opportunities they need to fulfil their potential. Businesses are crying out for more flexibility in the levy so they can train up their staff. Labour would give them that. Why won't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we're talking about education and skills. What he failed to mention is just in the past week, what did we discover? Thanks to the reforms of the Conservative government, our young people are now the best readers in the Western world, Mr. Speaker. Reforms reforms that were opposed by the party opposite. He also talked about our record on the economy. And I am very surprised, Mr. Speaker, because I've stood here week after week when he's been so keen to quote the IMF, Mr. Speaker. And he seemed to have missed their press conference yesterday, where they actually raised our growth forecast by one of the highest they've ever done, said that we've acted decisively to make sure that the economy is growing, and credited this government with having a very positive effect on future growth.
The amazing thing about the IMF is when the IMF said the economy was tanking, it was a total mess, it was dismissed as a woke snowflake organisation and all their forecasts were wrong, and now suddenly they're absolutely gospel.
True, they're not actually by Sunak. I think that was the Truss government that had a big problem with the IMF. So, well, I thought that was a good question and a good answer there. Actually, you got really to the essence of what both of these guys are trying to do. Starmer having tried to tie immigration to sort of less well-off people in Britain in the previous question, then goes for you've lost control, and that's the sort of competence argument. You can't do this, mate. You can't run a what's it in a doodah, and it's you've lost control of this, you've lost control of that. Sunak's answer, quoting something helpful, but his big argument is going to have to be, as the year goes on, that the economy's back in shape. I wonder whether Starmer will point out that while inflation has dropped, food price inflation is still rising, which is bad news for the government. But if Sunak can gradually give people the idea that the economy is turning around, that is very far from sufficient for him to win a general election, but it is absolutely the basic building block of it. If he can do that, at least he's got something to build on. If he can't get that through to people, then he's got no chance at all. Necessary but not sufficient, as they say.
And the apprenticeship levy, that was one of those things that seemed a good idea at the time. It was all about how it all works out. So this is big companies. You have to have a payroll of more than £3 million pounds. And then I think it's 0.5% of your total payroll is supposed to be taken out and spent on apprentices. The idea being it either encourages companies to take on apprentices, or the money is used by other companies who do want to take on apprentices. And the concern has been that either the money's not been used, or companies have basically been diddling it and calling people apprentices or training when it isn't.
Yes, and also, they have the option of going and getting someone cheaper from abroad, and as a lot of companies say, it's quite often difficult to get Brits interested in, taking these things on. Interesting that Sunak did talk about the literacy rates there, and that's primarily of historic interest. That's actually all about Michael Gove when he first came in as Education Secretary
Precisely
back in
because
2010.
It takes so long.
It takes an age. It's a classic case of public policy having an effect, literally 12, 13 years later. And Nick Gibb, who's been schools minister for vast tracts of that period, and Gove, who got it all up and running, got a lot of praise the other day. I think we're up to 4th in the world, and and really we were risible if you go back to that point. And Labour, with the teaching unions sort of in tow, didn't like a lot of that stuff at the time, and it does seem to have had some effect.
Yeah, this use of
and Sunak,
phonics.
to be fair to him, does bang on about skills all the time. Now, Starmer is probably right to say that not enough has been done to make companies do anything about it. But it's precisely the argument. I've sat listening to Rishi Sunak, burning my ears off, talking about skills and all the rest of it.
But ultimately, that is that slightly dull stuff, which was going to make the difference. If we had people with better skills, we wouldn't need as many people coming in. And then Bob's your uncle.
And this is the fascination to me about the Sunak government. Sunak is a sort of classic case of a leader who, if he had 5 years, you sort of think by the end of it, he might have something interesting to show for it.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who wants to move slowly and build incrementally, who's basically only got 15 months to save himself and his party. So it's a case of dragging this bloke into the political arena and making him kind of get some wins over the Labour Party, when really his inclination is to spend 10 years doing everything.
Well, we're now only 2 questions away from Tim buying me a dinner. Was it a very expensive dinner?
Is that what I said?
I think that's what you said. We'll check the tape. If there's no mention of Boris Johnson at PMQs, let's go back to the House from Keir Starmer. Let's go back to the House. And there's a question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
is the Prime Minister seriously suggesting that breaking the economy, breaking public services, losing control of immigration is some sort of carefully crafted plan? His policies are holding working people back, and all he offers is more of the same. But fear not, because speeding into the void left by the Prime Minister comes the Home Secretary.
Speeding into
Not
the
with
void.
a plan for skills, growth
Oh, he was
or
pleased with
wages.
that.
No. Her big idea is for British workers to become fruit pickers. Just in case, I can hardly believe she said this, that they forget how to do things. Does the Prime Minister support this let them pick fruit ambition for Britain? Or does he wish he had the strength to give her a career change of her own?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about public service, he talks about the economy. Again, I think he's just failed to notice what's going on. The IMF, as they've said, it's right here, Mr. Speaker. Our forecasts, which he was very keen to point out just a few months ago, now their forecasts are that we will have stronger growth than Germany, France and Italy, Mr. Speaker. What do they say? They're saying that we are prioritising what's right for the British people, Mr. Speaker. He talked about public services, as I said. Best reading results in the Western world. When it comes to the NHS, what did we just discover last week? Ambulance waiting times at the fastest response in 2 years, Mr. Speaker. That's a Conservative government delivering for the British people.
That's a Conservative government making things slightly less terrible than the previous Conservative government had left them. Again, sorry.
I was just actually looking to see if Keir Starmer did say anything about the International Monetary Fund. He did in March last year, apparently, saying they were the worst performing country in the G7 this year.
There we go then. What goes around comes around.
What goes around comes around.
But again, that was a good punchy exchange. Starmer, having gone from lost control, is now talking about things breaking. It's, the classic theme, broken Britain, which he's been hammering most weeks. Couple of okay,
speeding,
sort of marginal.
It feels
gags.
like I feel like the meeting in Labour HQ for some speeding jokes. I feel that like a meeting dragged on.
I'm not sure everybody turned up with their full sort of thinking caps on for that one. And then again, interesting though, at the end of all that from Starmer, talking about Braverman's let them pick fruit idea, and does he wish he had the strength to give her a career change? We're back to the weakness charge for the most of the last couple of months. Starmer's been banging Rishi Sunak as out of touch. At the turn of the year, it was you're too weak to do anything about all these sleazy characters, and
it's also hard.
Does this presage a mention of one last gentleman in his peroration?
Get a dinner. It's also not. It's hard to discern from that exactly who Keir Starmer thinks should be picking the fruit. If he thinks that Suella Braverman is wrong to say that Brits should be picking the fruit, who should be picking the fruit? And is it all right for us to import cheap labour from overseas to pick the fruit, or is he just against fruit?
Maybe he thinks fruit's a bit avant-garde.
Well, we were talking earlier. So, Lara Spirit had a bad satsuma earlier, and it turns out everyone's having bad satsumas. Not that I think you're picking. If you're picking your satsumas,
are we blaming
in this country,
Brexit for that, or is there some other?
I don't know.
Is it black spot disease that's infiltrating?
They were
us?
just not a good satsuma. But then, they're probably not growing here, are they?
It wasn't small
Watery.
and it wasn't juicy.
Watery, tasteless, stringy. Anyway, let's not go.
Should go to the House of Commons canteen.
Is that where we're going for our dinner?
Well, no, I'll do you better than that.
Right, okay, well, let's find out. There's a lot riding on this.
I still have hope.
The most excited I've been for PMQs for ages.
Well, since Zippy was here, anyway.
Oh, yeah, no, thank God. Is Keir Starmer going to mention Boris Johnson in his last question? And if he doesn't, Tim's going to buy me dinner.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary may need a speed awareness course. He needs a reality check. This mess on immigration reveals a Tory party with no ambition for working people and no ambition for Britain. Just the same old failed ideas, low wages and high tax. Labour would fix the apprenticeship levy, fill the skills gap and stop businesses from recruiting from abroad if they don't pay properly. That's because we're the party of working people. What does it say about him and his party that they won't do the same?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm very disappointed.
Mr. Speaker, I think he said it 6 times, but I don't think we actually know how he's going to do any of these things, Mr. Speaker. And look, that's the difference between us, Mr.
It doesn't
Speaker,
matter now, I'm
that
getting
every
dinner.
week We hear a lot of empty rhetoric from the honourable gentleman opposite, but in the past we can measure ourselves by actions. What have we done on this side of the House? We've introduced new powers to curb disruptive protests. We're protecting public services against undisruptive strike action, Mr. Speaker, and we have new laws to stop the boats. What has he done? He's voted against every single one of those. And that's the difference between us. While he's working on the politics, we're working for the British people.
Which is itself a political line.
Yes. Dinner on Tim, says Aman. Luke says dinner. Everyone's very excited. This dinner bet is the most exciting thing since Zippy. Winner, Chorley dinner.
There we go. Oh, well, I'm delighted, actually. It's time we had dinner.
It's time we had dinner, and I feel, yes. That was the most exciting thing that came out of that. If you've only just tuned in, at the very beginning, Tim Shipman bet me that Boris Johnson would not come up. Would come up. That Keir Starmer wouldn't be able to resist mentioning Boris Johnson and Partygate.
But how very interesting.
Yes.
What is worse than being talked
turning
about
all
Prime Minister's question?
A piece of analysis.
Of course, but it's very interesting, isn't it? That, what would once have been an absolutely bog standard stock attack line, and poor old Boris Johnson is not. It's no longer the butt of jokes and attacks.
What time is it?
He's
in
just
Las
being
Vegas
ignored
right now.
He'd be very upset to be being ignored.
But also it points to what I was making, the confidence of the Labour operation, that instead of battering away at Suella Braverman and Boris Johnson, they tackle head on possibly one of their weakest areas.
Yep, and that will the idea of that, I guess, is to gently impress the journalists covering this that they're serious about all this. And to gradually let it percolate through to the public that, there aren't no-go areas in terms of... and he actually strung an argument together, sort of on and off. There were different approaches in each question. And I thought Sunak's response at the end was very interesting as well. And I think it highlights the dilemma he's got. He says, we've done all these things and you voted against them all.
Yeah.
Well, as we know... a lot of people think Keir Starmer is the bloke who says no in the focus groups, and they moan that he just opposes everything. And Labour clearly hasn't yet done enough to seal the deal with the public and show them that their plan for government is something that will have them all cheering in the streets. So that, in essence, is a line that sort of works for Sunak. But he then says, "Oh, you're doing all this politics, and we're just delivering." And what a lot of the Conservative Party is concerned about, as it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Rishi Sunak sort of thinks if he delivers, then he's going to win. And a lot of people think that's not the case. You don't just have to deliver. You've got to convince people that it was terribly difficult, what you've done is heroic, and that the other lot will blow it.
Because actually, John Major's a lesson in that as you turn things around, and he didn't get any credit for it.
No, he left a rather nice economic legacy for the Labour Party, which they won 3 general elections off the back of. So, this is what troubles a lot of Conservatives, that Sunak doesn't have enough politics in him.
Yeah. Well, everyone's very excited about dinner on the YouTube channal.
I'm not sure we're going to film this dinner for YouTube. Then,
well, somebody's actually suggested that dinner should be filmed for YouTube. People are posting restaurant reviews as well.
Where do they want us to go? Well,
let's have a look. God, there's so many now. I can't keep across them all. Tim, take Matt to Straker's in Notting Hill. Fabulous food. Sabor is nice, says Paul. I've never heard of any of these. The dinner must be streamed on the YouTube channel, says Tom. Matt suggests you go to the Riverside restaurant of the Savoy, says John.
I was thinking more of the Boot and Floggard up the road.
Hortons, says Scott. Anyway, let us know where we should be going for dinner after I won a bet with Tim. The most interesting thing that happened, John Pierre. No, actually, it was interesting.
I think that was a pretty decent exchange in a lot of ways, actually.
Learning a lot. Also, the one thing that I made notes of a couple of times is that Keir Starmer's sort of bang, bang, bang attack line, lost control of the economy, lost control of public services, lost control of immigration. Then he did broken. And actually lumping those 3 things together. And then suddenly that becomes, you can do lost control of economy, lost control of public service, lost control of thing we want to talk about today. Yeah. It's quite a clever way of doing it. Anyway, no, people stop talking about the Tesco meal deal. That definitely doesn't count as dinner. Right.
That would be if we're taking Dominic Raab out.
Up next, Lara Spirit will be here if she's finished her Satsuma to tell us about the best of the rest. And then Trevor Kavanagh from The Sun on scandals. I've been asking for your best and worst favourite scandals, big and small. So we'll do that as well after we get a news update from Rachel Jewell.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has kicked off Prime Minister's questions with a dig over migration, asking why Suella Braverman has a problem coping with points-based systems. Net migration figures due out tomorrow are expected to show record highs. With a reference to recent headlines, Sir Keir says the government's repeatedly broken promises to reduce immigration.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary may need a speed awareness course. He needs a reality check. This mess on immigration reveals a Tory party with no ambition for working people and no ambition for Britain. Just the same old failed ideas, low wages and high tax.
The Prime Minister hit back, saying Labour has absolutely no ideas on this.
What have we done on this side of the House? We've introduced new powers to curb disruptive protests. We're protecting public services against undisruptive strike action, Mr. Speaker, and we have new laws to stop the boats. What has he done? He's voted against every single one of those. And that's the difference between us. While he's working on the politics, we're working for the British people.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak's criticised the Home Secretary over her handling of a speeding ticket, but decided she won't face further investigation. Suella Braverman's been accused of asking officials to help, which the Prime Minister says caused a perception of impropriety. And inflation has dropped by less than expected again to 8.7% for the year to April. Food price rises have barely slowed at all, prompting Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to warn they're still going up too fast. Plenty of strong sunshine for many of us this afternoon. Cloudier in places, particularly in Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. Generally feeling warm with light winds, but cooler under the cloud and breezy on some coasts in the north and west. Nick Ellaby has the sports.
Good afternoon. The young English fast bowler who dismissed Australia's best batter in the county championship this month has been rewarded with a first England Test call-up. Worcestershire's Josh Tongue's been added to Ben Stokes' squad to play Ireland, with Jimmy Anderson and Ollie Robinson both slight injury concerns ahead of the Ashes. Former England international and Times cricket writer Steve James told us England won't risk either of them against Ireland.
It's difficult to know what to make of it in terms of, where the others are with injuries. It obviously does say that there are some concerns about injuries, but quite how bad they are and whether Tongue has just been caught up as cover or not, we'll have to wait and see, I think.
England face Ireland at Lord's a week tomorrow. The Ashes against Australia start on June the 16th. England football international Fran Kirby has signed a new deal at Chelsea, keeping her at the club until next summer. The forwards won the Women's Super League 5 times and the FA Cup 4 times since moving to Chelsea in 2015. Kirby's also the WSL's leading scorer with 110 goals from just 175 games. Now, Valencia have said they'll fight the punishment handed to them after their fans racially abused Real Madrid's Vinicius Jr. The stand where the chants came from has been temporarily closed and the club's been fined about £39,000. Yesterday, Spain's La Liga called for a change in the law so they have more powers to deal with racism. Spanish football lawyer Íñigo de la Calle told us that could happen quickly.
This matter is being discussed in society. The political parties are very aware of it. So if they get on and agree on this will be very quick. I mean, it can take 2 months to, enforce the law.
And Wales rugby union great Alan Wynne-Jones will captain Eddie Jones's Barbarians against the World 15 at Twickenham this Sunday. Alan Wynne-Jones has 170 Wales caps and 12 for the British and Irish Lions, and he's just announced he's retiring from the international game as well, meaning he'll miss this autumn's World Cup. You can read more on these stories on the Times website and app.
This is Times Radio.
Can AI help us be more human?
Does when we're born affect how we work?
Is technology our planet's best hope?
Listening differently helps us think differently. Join us in the Green Room for conversations that matter. Listen to the Deloitte podcast Search The Green Room by Deloitte, wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Sam from Swanley. Hi, guys. Sam is one of our brilliant McDonald's business managers.
Ah, thank you.
He runs a successful restaurant, inspires his team, delivers for the business, and makes sure his customers have a great time every time. And get this, he's only 23.
Actually, I'm only 22.
22? And I'm sure if you ask him, Sam would say he's only just getting started.
I'm only just getting started.
See? Let's build careers together at mcdonalds.co.uk/jobs.
John Pienaar at Drive. This afternoon from 5 on Times Radio.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
Very good afternoon to you. I just said to Lara Spirit, are you coming to dinner? And she said, what dinner? Because, of course, Lara's been listening to the best of the rest.
I have.
So that we don't have to. How was it overall?
It wasn't the best of weeks this week. Sorry
Right.
to say that, but there are a few gems.
No, you need to try and,
Sorry,
build it
I know.
up.
Sorry, I'm learning.
Tell us about the gems.
Yeah.
Yeah, here is an incredible question.
Do you know why? Paul Bristow was thrown out? It seemed very weird.
He seemed to be making some noise that that Lindsay Hall didn't seem to like all that much, so he was thrown out. I mean, it was impossible to tell, but they were just very furrowed brow from.
It didn't seem a particularly sort of disruptive session there.
It's difficult. He sometimes gets like this. He singles people out when actually it seems like there must be about a dozen people making the same volume of noises.
We were saying
at any given time.
maybe because no one else was shouting. So Paul Bristow going, "You're rubbish."
I suppose we should be grateful that he didn't urge him to take some medicaments or something like that.
Or go for a cup of tea.
Yes.
You'll be having the tea. Nobody understands what that means. Anyway, so what have you got for us, Lara? Which is definitely must listen, and people must stay listening.
100%. So here's Stephen Flynn. It is an important question. It's on food inflation and the government's plans to address it. He makes the charge that there is a cost of greed crisis and not a cost of living crisis. But I think that it's interesting because Rishi Sunak comes out with a response echoed in other questions that you won't be listening to in the best of the rest regarding why he thinks that the IMS forecasts are very boosterish and why he's willing to stand there and defend the government's economic record. So have a listen to this.
Perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we learned today that the price of milk, cheese and eggs are up 29%. The price of pasta is up 27%. The price of a loaf of bread, 18%. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is no longer just a cost of living crisis? This is a cost of greed crisis.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was welcome that inflation has fallen today, but as the Chancellor said, we should not be complacent because there is more work to do. The Honourable Gentleman's right to highlight the impact of food inflation, which is too high, at common here levels that we've seen in other European countries like Sweden and Germany. We are providing significant support to help people with the cost of living, and the Chancellor has met with companies in the supermarket and food supply chain to make sure that they are doing everything they can to bring prices down.
Stephen Flynn.
In fact, what was interesting with that meeting after the Chancellor met the food companies yesterday, the Treasury put out a statement saying that they would look at prices, sort of hinting at possible intervention. I don't know what that would mean.
Yeah, I mean, there was a follow-up question from Flynn regarding this, and Rishi Sunak responded to say the CMA is independent, but we'll be hearing about more of this soon. So I think slightly keeping that at arm's length and insisting that if there is an intervention, that it will be led by an independent organisation.
That sounds like very much the kind of thing that Ed Miliband used to suggest, and the Tory party used to accuse him of basically being a communist. But if pasta's up 27% and bread is up, we're not going Italian, are we, for this dinner?
No, so it said in the statement yesterday, it said the Chancellor confirmed that the government stands ready to update pricing rules and guidance on the back of the Competition and Markets Authority review of unit pricing. So it sort of raises the prospect. I don't actually know what that means.
Well, it sounds very like price controls, doesn't it?
Yeah, which is very retro.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because politically, this is the biggest problem Sunak's got. But the other problem he's got is that half of his backbenchers don't think he's conservative enough. So if he tries to do anything to help people who can't afford a bowl of pasta, he's going to find a lot of his own side.
But the implication of that is you could have the government saying there's a maximum amount you can charge for a pint of milk or eggs.
I don't know how it would work, but you can imagine encouragement for the supermarkets to perhaps get their sort of basics range into the realms where people can afford it.
Because the concern is that because everyone's talked about the cost of living crisis
5p
for
more
a year.
on Matthew Chorley's finest pasta.
I make my own, darling.
Well, you can have me over to dinner in that case.
No, no, we're definitely going somewhere posh. Lara, who else have you got?
We've got Sarah Olney next, talking about investment. This is an issue that privately quite a few Tories are pretty worried about, but I think Rishi Sunak, as you'll hear, much more boosterish than you would expect. It's quite an amusing response. Just take a listen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Under the Conservatives, so much of the UK's potential is going untapped. Anemic growth, falling living standards and declining international competitiveness. Just this morning, a solar power company developing an innovation from Oxford University said that the UK is the least attractive market in which to base its business due to a lack of incentives. This is a homegrown company that could have provided well-paid green jobs lost to this country thanks to the government's lack of an industrial strategy. So why does the Prime Minister think it is that each week more and more promising businesses are choosing to leave the UK?
Lib Dem Sarah Olney.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady obviously missed the comments from the IMF yesterday, upgrading our growth performance. She obviously missed the survey of thousands of global CEOs just recently placing the UK as their #1 European investment destination. And it sounds like she also missed my trip to Japan last week, where we announced £18 billion of new investment into the UK economy.
Little chance of any of us missing his IMF announcement.
No. Or indeed his trip to Japan. He's got a lot of coverage over that, although he didn't particularly enjoy it.
Not a lot of it about Japan,
no.
It's fair to say.
But no, got very cross with Chris Mason.
He does get a bit prickly.
He's a bit
prickly.
Yeah.
And he should have been better prepped for that question anyway. We're sort of dancing off into the weeds now.
No, but this is the point that Chris Mason asked at the press conference at the end of the G7 about Suella Braverman and her speeding fine. And he sort of said, "You're not going to ask about the summit? Are we very busy at the summit?"
Yeah, I mean, this happens at every summit. I mean, every time you or I ever went on one of these trips, there were probably 2 questions about the summit, and that was normally from a broadcaster who wanted to look like a bit of a SWAT, and everybody else would just ask about whatever was in the papers.
But also it's because, if you wanted to bring back the monthly press conferences that Prime Ministers in the past have done, but, otherwise the only chance to put questions to the Prime Minister is...
That is very true. It seems vanishingly unlikely we'll be getting monthly press conferences.
A little bit of breaking news to bring you while I've been talking about the Cabinet Office, and this is the Boris Johnson story. But me mentioning it does not count, I'm afraid.
Tragically 14 minutes too late.
So the Cabinet Office has responded to the suggestion of a ministerial stitch-up or otherwise, saying the Cabinet Office has not made any assessment or conducted any investigation of the material that has been passed to the police. This is in relation to Boris Johnson and parties, gatherings, work events at Chequers and whether or not they broke lockdown rules, the suggestion being that events took place during lockdown at Chequers, the Prime Minister's Grace and Favour home, which have come to light as a result of Boris Johnson having legal support to respond to the Privileges Committee. Officials had looked at his diaries and there had been questions raised about what was happening.
That's Boris Johnson, who's earned about £5 million from speeches and is still receiving 13.5 grand's worth of free accommodation each month.
But yes, and he's getting the taxpayer to pay his legal fees, and therefore the Cabinet Office, which is therefore working for him, in his defence to the Privileges Committee, have unearthed the possibility that he may have broken more rules. Anyway, this is what the Cabinet Office has said. The Cabinet Office has not made any assessment or conducted any investigation of the material that's been passed to the police. Ministers played no role in deciding whether the information should be handed over to the police. The police were first contacted on the 16th of May prior to any minister being made aware. The decision to contact the police and the subsequent decision to share the information was not made by ministers but by officials acting in line with the Civil Service Code.
So the conspiracy theory that ministers have stitched up Boris Johnson would appear to be inaccurate. The great thing about conspiracy theories is that may all be a conspiracy as well.
Thank you for that, Tim. Your favourite scandal, Tim, of previous times? Edward Lee was complaining that we don't have scandals like we used to.
I think the ones that stick most memorably in my mind are not the ones that ought to be repeated on the radio. I remember something that a Labour cabinet minister said to someone at a conference in Cardiff once, which has always stayed with me. You may know what I'm talking about.
No, but that feels like something to discuss off air. Maybe over dinner.
Over dinner.
We will discuss it over dinner. Lara, thank you for that. Lara Spirit, what time will the Red Box PMQs Unpacked email be in people's inbox?
3 p.m.
3 p.m. on the dot. Times subscribers, go to thetimes.co.uk/redbox and Lara will round it all up, including the brilliant view from the gallery from Quentin. Is he doing that today?
He is.
Oh, thank goodness. Very good. Lovely stuff. Right, up next, Trevor Kavanagh's going to be here, hopefully talking about some scandals we can discuss on the radio. And we've got her back. She's back after Gail was done in yesterday by a bad quiz question. She's back, and she's going to have another go at the quiz. We'll do that next on Times Radio.
Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio. The news you need to know, the views you need to hear.
There are too many people who need pleasing at the moment, and their needs are very, very disparate.
A world-class lineup of guests, experts and contributors.
We exceeded expectations, but that wasn't very hard given how low those expectations were.
Telling the stories that matter.
And all the latest news, views and interviews.
Mariella Frostrup, this afternoon from 1 on Times Radio.